Okay. Hello, everyone. Let me fix. Okay. Should be better now. Hello, everyone. Welcome to tonight's episode. It's a very unique title. Um, I want to speak about how certain cultural movements take the spotlight of human beings away from traditional values. And what that means is one technology can take the attention of so many people away from something that their ancestors had paid attention to nonstop. The world is becoming a more globalized place. From one viewpoint, I thought, what does this mean? Currently I live in Canada, and I was thinking, what does it mean for Canada? And Canada is a very lovely place. To some people, it's a paradise, but to me, it's become a sort of airport. And what I mean by that is that it's like the addition of certain cultural influences take the attention away from certain things. This has happened between many. Like I consider many nations have kind of gone through this. We can say culture is a behavioral program dependent on a program of language, the language that is used. I don't know. I just feel new actions are erasing old ones. And in doing so, a new wave of behavioral kind of adjustment is appearing. I was given sometimes I record talks throughout the day that are not live stream. It's like when an idea comes to me, I pick up, I click the red button. And so I was kind of thinking of what my final vision is. I was trying to see how far I see into human behavior and the reasoning behind it. And I came to this kind of very crucial point of awareness where I realized people have an expression, a threshold to express themselves throughout the day, you know? And it's not just expression, it's expression in a certain way. It's as if our minds are unseen, excuse me, our minds are unseen, and certain amount of our actions have to be efforts to make this seen. I was thinking, what does the human being that is alone, like when I go downtown Toronto, I see a lot of defeated people on the streets, and my big question is like, where should their attention be? Because there are hierarchies in society, that means the peasant and the prince are walking on the same streets. Which is another here. I gotta share this story. There's this shoemaker, okay, and his son's there, and they're very very poor family, and the shoemaker decides to ask his son, and he's like, "Son, come here," and the son comes there, kind of trying to make his father proud in any way he can. It's a young kid, and then the father's like, "Son, what do you want to do when you kind of get to my age, not to my, like, you know what I mean, like, it's like, what do you want to do when you grow up or something?" And the kid looks at his father and he's like, "My father's a shoemaker, I'm gonna say shoemaker. That's my final answer." Who wants to be millionaire style? He says, "I want to be a shoemaker just like you, Dad." And then the father starts hitting his head. He's like, oh my God, oh my God. He's freaking out. And he tells his son, son, I wanted to be a king and I ended up being a shoemaker. You want to be a shoemaker, you're going to end up being nothing. I think here's the thing. Based on one's desire animates in accordance to what they have been exposed to. So you can say before any desire you had to first see a sort of possibility for the phenomena to be there on its own, as if like there must be something to be desired. Do you know? So when I kind of look at it, it's like, okay, how come when I was super young and I have memories from then, I had less desires, I had less internal intents for the world, less internal intentions for the world. And I realized that the thing is, we are conditioned into a shape in a world where all shapes change. And our ancestors have been entertaining a certain shape. Do you know? But if we only use the past to respond to the present, in some sense, we have forgotten about the future. Too many people are trying to keep the past alive. Too little people are attempting future endeavors. There is a sort of battle between the disciplined self and the free self going on. Now, I remember this was this afternoon today. I was trying to pinpoint exactly. Okay, let me see. The human being enters the world, realizes it's on a rock in the middle of nowhere, realizes it has sparked meaning, but what else is seeking? And let me tell you, we are starving for the other mind. Excuse me. Another way of saying this is we are familiar with what we know, and we are kind of wondering about the edge of knowledge and reaching a point where we want unknown and unknown movement. It's kind of like the body, of course, is on a plane of is in a plane of existence, is on the surface of a planet where there's many bodies, many species, many creatures, many designs, many genetical patterns, kind of sprouting. However, the completion of human life is to see more. I feel we are not just creatures who want to just keep breathing longer. It's like while we're breathing, it's a sort of pursuit, an intelligent pursuit of intelligence. Let me say it like this: a known intelligent pursuit of an unknown intelligence. Okay, when I say we're starving for the other mind, that's another way of saying it's as if you want, instead of you putting, imagine their thought was a veil, was a curtain. And instead of you putting your hand, you want the curtain to move on its own. And that's another way of kind of fitting in to a new collective system. It gives you an identity. Let me tell you why the greatest and the worst kind of movements in our history by people, whether it was Martin Luther King or Hitler, they were united under a sort of an urge of involvement being met. The person felt they were part of something more than themselves. You know, you see the same phenomena in the video game industry. You see, first games were singular, then they connected the players all online, and it was crazy for me. I would remember, like, a cousin of mine was obsessed with playing this Warcraft game, and he was playing it so long where it's as if it was ridiculous. It's as if he was leveling up these champions to sell them. And it was a very crazy thing for me that it was and I wondered what drew him in, and it was the unknown variable of other human players. Nobody wants to dance in an empty room. That's another way of saying the same thing. And so the inner dancer wants to not only be acknowledged externally, but wants externality to listen to it. You know, most people don't communicate to be heard, if you notice. They just communicate to fill up space. A lot of small talk is that pretty much. Do you know? It's kind of like strangers trying to find familiarity, you know? It's kind of very cool because it's not just every person you see has a mind. The mind is the greatest way their brain is kind of moving. It's how hard their neurons are working, you know? Now, what causes the neurons to work hard, you know? That's a puzzle of its own. But I feel it has to do with the intelligence. We come to a point where kind of like the harder problems of consciousness are solved when man realizes the mind. You can say just like in quantum physics, like there was a simultaneity of position of the electron in like two locations, the same electron. So it becomes one of those things where it's one self in two worlds, or two worlds in one self, you know. Either the world has to change. Think of it this way: there's an outer self and an outer world, there's an inner self and an inner world. The greatest realization about the inner self and the inner world is that they are generated in the present moment. You know, it's evocational. The kind of design your mind throws upon the world is evocational. You might not believe it, but energy has found a way to think. Electrons in this cosmic sector have found a way to become philosophers, you know. If the concept is that no self is alone, that means you can't know if you're alone if there never was a potential for others. Do you know? Now, this is something I haven't gotten a lot into. I've kind of been sometimes suggesting to people in these talks that you need to reverse engineer back into your memories and come to the primal axis of your system of belief, right? This is why I'm saying that, like, language is clothing we wear, you know? The ego is, the skin of the ego is made of language, you know? Pretty much what I'm saying is we're putting the world in a box of our knowledge at first. We will go on living endlessly in this box of knowledge. Now, there may come times in life where either physicality, either the world's conditions are becoming so chaotic that the inner reality's order has to find a new order to respond. Let me tell you what there's something cool about the ego, you know? The ego, by the ego, I mean the idea of self, to make it simpler. Okay, so there's something cool about having a subjective image of yourself. Do you know? When that image gets pushed, meaning can arise. So let me tell you what I feel is happening behind the scenes of our eyes, of our momentary intelligence. It's that something is trying to hold on to one point, and in order, because it's holding on to one point, it can understand change. Because there is something watching life, we can notice there is a shift from one reference of objective phenomena to another, you know. Thanks, Idris. I just saw the chat. Welcome to the talk, man. Always appreciate a listener, you know. But the ultimate realization is that, of course, you cannot avoid how you give value to the moment, you know. And believe it or not, I find that there's a sort of excuse me. I'm trying to kind of find my way back to where I was heading. Idea of this cultural massacre, and how, in some sense, it's a massacre of traditional values. And what that means is our change on this planet is not objective only. When we have an ability, this is what I'm suggesting. They should have taught this in schools, but they don't. They teach about an objective evolution, but they don't speak about the subjective evolution. When the person comprehends the nature of the subjective evolution, they go to the pond is still, the ripples on the pond are still. It's another way of saying like ideas are dying in the battlefield in vast amounts because the human experience is shift, like the attention is becoming more complex. Terence McKenna spoke about kind of a crystallization of the universe. Do you know? Scientists say the Big Bang. It's kind of like the universe cooling down. So there are views of kind of seeing this cosmos that it suddenly became more and complex because in some sense, like the creature's experience was stretched somehow. If the creature is separate from its world, it can be studied. If the creature and the world are not separate, they cannot be studied. It's like after you finish listening to the voice of people, you listen to the voice of nature. The voice of nature is not a voice, it's just how the subjective, it's like an awareness to how objectivity is changing and subjectivity is changing. And what that means is you could look at a cup. Imagine there's like a metal cup in front of you, and you can't see inside. Let's say a golden cup. You can't see that it's a long cup. You can't see what's inside the cup. So when you look at the cup, imagine your mind wondering about all the different kind of drinks that could be in that cup potentially, or there could not even be a drink. That's the power of the unknown. It's space we cannot penetrate, so we either reach a dead end, or we pilot somewhere else. Do you know, it's kind of hilarious. They say honor the voice of your ancestors, but if all your ancestors were honoring the voice of their ancestors, they were never, it's as if the people who lived, the environment defines our evolution. So it's as if, like, if humanity was an army of minds, we would have to require to send like a certain section of this army to study how the world changes. A certain portion of human civilization studies how the world ends, and a certain portion of human civilization studies how the world starts. Do you know? And it's as if it becomes a sort of triangle of perception where the various dimensional ways, like, here's the cool thing: in ancient times, they saw the five elements: earth, air, fire, water, and space. And when you really pay attention, what it means, elements, it means how manifestation is constituted, how it's appearing. Do you know? So they categorized it through that. We currently categorize it with this modern periodic table. Many different moments in history, they've had different ways they've kind of thrown their spear of knowledge at the unknown sky. Every generation does this. The issue is when in some sense, a failure to confront the unknown leads to a conclusion that knowledge should never change. That there is nothing that slows down a species than its inability to see its ability. Stories are battling it out. There's a war of language going on. There's a war of language in accordance to how the human attention adopts it or enters that sort of Iron Man suit of the moment. Believe it or not, it's to a true actor, the whole world is a stage. Because experientially you don't understand it. It's like avalanches happen with one single experience. You can have avalanches occur of various conceptual outlines, various ways your mind has adopted design as its own face. So I want to kind of, here's the cool thing. I noticed this whole thing with the political correctness happening. It's kind of hilarious. It's a sensitivity to language. Now, on some level, there's an advantage. I personally like it. I think when people get angry about words, they're soon going to realize they're not thoughts. I have this kind of vision. But the whole point is that there's a sensitivity to which reality, where is truth located. And this location of truth has been fought over. And when our subjective realms evolved, it was as if a battle of language. You don't understand. It's like the environment throws language at you, you throw language at the environment. You know, these are subtle ways of being aware of how thought appears. There was a time, I'll share this story, and Idris, I think you're the only one listening, so. But I'll tell you this. I had this friend named Gabriel, and him and his brother went camping, and I was invited, and I go there, and we're sitting around the fire, and it's kind of sharing stories, and suddenly Gabriel's older brother looks at him and says to him, like, it's insane how much you can hear from listening. I'm sorry, Gabriel says that, and his brother acknowledges him. And for the first time, I noticed, like, listening, the way the educational system is designed. It's like children are told. It's like they enter the classroom at various altered states of mind. They sit there and they watch. If they are asked for performance, obviously all students have a different kind of outlook on life. Do you see? So their approaches would be different. So if the test is only for the person to be able to duplicate, it's like if you can copy paste, then in some sense you can pass anything. But the question, the authentic question and inspiration, when you listen, you are actually allowing the moment to observe itself linguistically. Sound becomes beautiful when you appreciate the fact that it can be absent. Suddenly every movement gets a strange glow to it. And in some sense, that's when I say divinity finds you. When divinity finds you, you cannot have, it's like literally a moment where the presence of how your mind is here is you're paying more attention to all the different rather than all the ways it can project. So in some sense, it's like holding a baseball in your hand and wondering how intensely it can be thrown. It can be thrown with various intensities. So when I say reverse engineering back to this kind of principle universal philosophy, what that means is, believe it or not, this is what happens. When you really, really go back early in your memories, you start off being memories of self, But when you go to a point, a certain phase of the childhood, of the human being, that phase, literally the child before learning language was just mind is moment, mind is moment, mind is moment. Then suddenly, wait a minute, people are talking to me. Archetypes come in and reanimate the mind of the person through the towards the sophistication of the linguistic simulation. That means the linguistic simulation will pull you in because as a human being, you will wonder where the greatest games are being played. Something interesting I noticed that unfortunately this is why I say the civilization is inefficient, because the civilization allows, it's like certain freedoms you should not give, because these freedoms in some sense are actually hidden chaos. And then the whole dilemma of the moral landscape comes in, and we realize we're different personalities wondering which world is right. Every person's sense of self is in a sense of world. And you'll kind of notice this oscillation, and you'll see why they said karma was a wheel. To be honest, they didn't have a word for spiral probably back then. Do you know? That's why they called it like a wheel, but it's like a spiral, and it's this oscillation between world being self and self being world being self, self being world. When world is being self, it's as if it's like the logos will whisper into your ear, in some sense, find the ability to confront the vision of the moment as if you were never here. Do you see? It's like as a pilot, we are practicing certain ways to maneuver the attention, right? So what it is to be honest, it's like if you care about your moment, something phenomenal will happen. If you don't care, then nothing will happen, because there's no, I will tell you, nothing is more powerful. Like Victor Hugo, this European philosopher, he said, this European writer, he said, nothing is more powerful than an idea in which its time has come. And I want to follow that up with, what Mr. Within would say. The true vision will instantly pull you, the false vision will be resisted. It's as if you kind of realize the ball is in your court the more internal you go, as if energetic presence is kind of becoming animate subjective being, right? And it's such an incredible point I find in academia. Something is happening. Like I'll tell you this, it's as if like the professors are falling asleep because they are doing the work of machines. I have this strange vision that if there is like some new universal declaration of human rights added, and that's the right to have access to knowledge, that means the human being exists and it has a right to know. That right to know is like, imagine this planetary law that every educational system cannot be a business anymore. Imagine. I'm just saying this as a parallel reality to what's happening now. It's like the financial aspect of it goes. So literally, what happens is many schools start shutting down. Imagine if such a law is passed. So now, as all these schools start shutting down, some schools will remain. You know, the explorers of humanity never end. They will remain till the last. Like our last, our death is even an exploration for an explorer. You know. I've had certain moments dreams of my own death, and I've woken up to wonder. It's as if I did not die once in that dream. I died once as in the dream actually dying, and then blackout. The blackout before waking up was another death. You, you know, and I kind of notice life and death is just where we're sticking the checkpoints. This war of language is intense. The behavior of the human being can literally shift its intelligence to the major problems of the world, or it can shift it to its minor. The minor problems of the world become more selfish. The major problems of the world require more of a selfless response. You know, imagine right now you were a person who had all sorts of spiritual experiences imaginable, all of it. You experience every way that the world could be said to be spiritual or metaphysical. What then? Do you see the power of the present moment? What then? And then the mind starts rebuilding anew from scratch. It's as if, like, you realize all form is going to change. That means even the person's sense of value of self, trust me, tomorrow you're going to wake up and feel like a totally different being. That's the nature of attention. We are creatures of attention before we are creatures of thought. The attention is only there because it's like you can say there is focus, the concentration comes in, and like a simple way to see concentration, to be honest, just look at something and look at one point. Try to pinpoint an atom. So it's like somebody told you meditate on an atom. So look at an object and try to see one atom of it. And try to go as far as you can. And you'll suddenly see you're left with the limits. And once you look at it, this is called single pointedness of mind. When it's experientially understood, it's as if language bows uh, to its creator. It was pretty much like an evolution of attention. That's a better way of saying it. Because the evolution of attention can include the subjective evolution. But just the evolution of matter, guess what? If we just look at matter, we'll see matter. Whatever you look at, you keep seeing it. But the single pointedness of mind, I say, so I'll give you an example of it, okay? Right now, there's like this silver kind of cup of orange juice in front of me, okay? I'm looking at this cup and I'm trying to pinpoint an atom. Eventually, I see I'm trying to stop my attention from moving and just look at something. You see? So when now look at what happens. I'm giving you an example. For when I look at it at first, I'm just looking at the object, simple moment. Then suddenly I look at the object and I wonder what's inside the cup. Then I wonder about where the cup is. And do you see? So I'm saying like the attention, the single pointedness gives you an awareness of how the mind is rhythmically moving, and how the mind is, how the hemispheres of the brain are trying to kind of, the bird is trying to move both of its wings at the same time. That means the chaotic self has been confronted and accepted, and the ordered self has been confronted and accepted, and the being is now ready to truly be present in the moment. You know? So what that means is, when you see the origin was from emptiness, as if you didn't exist, then you came into existence, and then you see, even now that you've come into existence, there will come a moment where the whole nature of this existence will change. So it's, in some sense, we are burst. You see, birth is not a problem. The child doesn't have the intelligence to be conscious of pain. It's just you can say to some degree, just a movement of chemicals. You know, the chemicals have not uh, formulated a mind. You know, the thing is that we think the atom is lifeless. But if the atom is alive, do we need to get tissue boxes for our models and structures of how the universe we have contained in our attention? After, once the attention goes on, and let me say it like this. I look at this cup, I see the objective. It's objective existence. Very simple sensory visuals, kind of instant access. I see this object. Okay, now when I look at this object and I keep looking at it, suddenly I notice something subtle, something else, and is subtle is moving. Okay, and this subtle movement is thought. Okay, it's the appearance of thought. It doesn't just come, it builds up slowly. And by being, you start off as a sort of conscious witness of how, as your attention is on the objective reality, how there's suddenly subjective winds hitting you. I'm being poetic here. What I mean is, like, you pay attention to how chaos is trying to change order, and in doing so you become conscious of the inner order of the universe. The inner of the order of the universe, there's two options. Either the person is painting a picture of the world, or the artist has put down his brush and has dared enter the non-conceptual. So you see, the reason to be honest, I wouldn't be giving these talks with this depth, uh, and it's not, to me, it's not deep, because the history is a pattern that repeats. You know, it's like, it's nothing new. Civilizations freak out, civilizations calm down. Civilizations freak out, civilizations calm down, you know? And the program of the material universe continues with its design, you know? The cool thing about philosophy, I find, is that it's a mountain to climb. You see, it's about how well we can relate the inner findings to the outer findings, to the outer world. You see, one task of the human being is in such a unique evolutionary position. Like, it took us 4 billion years to be able to be creatures that not only develop language, but at the same time, somehow this interlink of, like, this intersecting point of image and objective phenomena. Do you see? The subjective realm is unavoidable. It's here. It's like people don't know how to acknowledge it because they think they're a thought. And in some sense, when I say they think they're a thought, that means they are ideologically possessed. They're still language worshippers. Another way of saying a language worship is like, imagine even the evolutionary creature not being able to become conscious. I feel there were loops. I feel there's no way we can ever know, how long our evolution was, because there were certain loops. It's as if, like, what that means is, it's like the person's trying to cross this, jump over this wall. The evolutionary creature can't. So for, imagine, millions of years, it's just like this kind of, like, imagine this robot who's kind of reached the wall, but its legs are still moving. Like, it's one of those kind of evolutionary things that I feel potentially has happened. So after becoming aware, usually objective reality is instantaneous. If you notice, this is why I find scientists want evidence, is because the evidence is an instantaneous attempt. It's like literally they don't need to. It doesn't need to be proven because it's instantaneously there. You know, that's the thing about reality. I say it's kind of like given imagination. What can be said about a changing world? It's funny because I feel there's always a universal song that's going on. I say it's kind of like the hidden symphony of the cosmos when you close your eyes and you just are present. It's like survival of the fittest object, survival of the fittest subject, then it comes to where is survival's peak, and it is, I say it is at it's beyond the language threshold. Another way of saying when we have reached the edge of a dualistic dimension, there's nothing else left at that point, and then there's the singular, um, then there's the singular reality that is an abiding factor. So at that point, the person is so non conceptual that suffering cannot even conceptually be real. That means subjectively there is such a silence that comes. This silence is like you have noticed the value of the experiential observer, the living part of life, that living part of it which is being you, right? So that's the cool thing, that we are animate creatures, we are self-intelligent. So I find that we have to kind of, if we were looking at the world as designers, we are pretty much from a known universe, observable universe, trying to build bridges through language, through the ability of man to express himself. An evolutionary return to nature. In doing so, man does not avoid what he has built. He reawakens to his finding. That means you look at the result of the experiment and you're like, oh my God, the result of the experiment can mean something else. You see, it is the world you're looking through. I when I speak, I am a creature of thought. You cannot avoid it. You have to, like, language is a technology that requires a sort of key in the engine, which is a singular idea of self, right? You have to be somebody to speak, somebody, that means you have to entertain a sort of individual conscious existence. But this does not mean that the human being does not, like, just think about as if you are a biological multidimensional antenna. And you, as a human being, can sit down at any moment in the universe and kind of wonder about how the world is moving. So there's many ways that thought can move. Of course, sometimes you have to move thought, like in a chess game. Sometimes in some sense, thought, something else moves thought. Something directs the attention. The attention is really, you give it so much freedom. It's as if the person becomes a parent to a child that is known and the child that is the unknown. So I'm saying, like, imagine these concepts as if, like, the parent has to equally see them. Do you know? There's always a blind spot, I find. And what that means is whether the idea enters the streams, the veins of civilization and history. And pretty much how attention walks on the roads that it paves. Man separated himself accidentally from his imagination by fighting a sort of linguistic reference point of a creator. So I'm telling you, there's something hilarious going on, that rather than us kind of being start from a simple field, as if imagine it just, I feel world peace can happen in an instant. Do you know? And let me tell you what I mean by that. That means literally every person's attention, they don't forget who they are. They don't forget what the world is. They have acknowledged it as if it's unavoidable now. The world is here. But I'm saying it's like for the first time, we find a silent moment where there is no noise of a projection of something in the future by any person's mind. That instant is the origin of peace. That's the power of zero. You know, it's the only number that can never be a number, that can never have a value. It is literally the unknown. It's my favorite number. To be honest, I can't really have a favorite number, but I find that when you have an ability to befriend your moment of being, what that means is, just like, this is, I don't know, this is something that it's been ways where I've ejected out of certain uh, karmic definitions, you know? The freedom of attention, like when you realize how naturally free your attention, it's like there's something so fascinating about being a temporary creature, that it's as if, like, we want the light in the room to be to be on as long as possible. This is kind of humanity's future. As one candle melts, we try to build another candle to quickly relight the second candle with. What that means is, if we separate people from their ideologies, they're literally moments of observance, simple moments of observance. But as they engage and act, they are in some sense sculpted and defined by how that ideology defines the world. So you have to realize that, like, sure, objectively, let's say you are blessed and you find the greatest, you know but subjectively, you have to be considerate of a sort of weather. Do you see? The weather is like, oh my God, I don't control the weather, you know. So what I'm saying by that is that it's the unknown. It's unknown movements of study in your moment of being. And trust me, when you find, it's like there are inner treasures, as Tibetan Buddhism would say. It's like you reveal an inner treasure, and I love that concept because it's suggesting the treasure is not a physical treasure. So what could it be? And we see only awarenesses here and there. You know, it's like somebody asked like the yogi, what's truth, man? And the guy was like, who's asking? And the guy says, me. And he's like, no. I said, who's asking? The one asking. The one who is asking. A question can birth a universe. You see, it's we have an advantage with our illusion. That means our mistakes can be used. The biggest mistakes in history have strangely a value. How chaos has responded to the order of civilization, it has value. You know, it's just that when we care for people's minds more than their bodies, then there comes this kind of awakening by, the collective kind of, governing influence of the world, where it's like, holy shit, it's like there are unknown minds that can potentially reveal. It's like, how many Einsteins are there in the world? You know, you know, it's as if nature eventually repeats the patterns it has access to. I've often thought like the rotation of the Earth could be creating the illusion of a sort of circular framework of reality. You know, in this book that hopefully I'm going to be able to release soon, it's called God Likes Spheres, and I'm kind of questioning existential design as an omnipresent witness of manifestation. To bring people's attention to a sort of sensitivity in how their communication uh, connects their emotion. So let me tell you what I think how guilt happens. Guilt happens is when the person sees something they could have done and they didn't do. Do you know? You see somebody who's innocent who never knew what they could have done. They don't. They're kind of just shocked at most. Do you know? But the person who saw that there was another parallel way the moment could happen but was not contributed to, it's as if it becomes to how you have allowed an inner resistance to define an outer resistance. So sometimes you're resisting things in life not because life is against you, because in some sense the idea of self you entertain is looking at things that way, you know. So the study of your eyes is a kind of exploration into the unknown. And this is why I'm saying it's like writing is a great way of a person studying how their mind is moving. Because I find the greater findings beyond language are kind of how language attempts to explain a rhythm. And what I mean by that is like the intensity or the unique ways this creature is alive on this planet. It's like so many sophisticated patterns. Of course, in a macrocosmic perspective, it doesn't matter. But in a microscopic perception, it's as if the more you zoom into the world, it becomes incredibly fragmented and geometric. The more you zoom out of the world, it's as if it just becomes. It's like the just like the exhale, inhale. It's as if the mind goes through simplicity, complexity, simplicity, complexity, chaos, order, known, unknown, known. Do you know? It's kind of like this spiraling And it's the spiral, I can say playfully, it's made of glass, let's say. This kind of strange glass that endlessly kind of changes in size. Sometimes it's like, believe it or not, I've had certain contemplations on thinking that the universe um, can never be fathomed, and because in some sense it was thrown, that means on some level, I'm thinking are atoms laughing at us, for what we think we are, you know. When they said anything is possible, I feel it's that attention can see the potential possibility of it. That means everything, there is a freedom for attention to fall upon any design, you know? So it's pretty much eventually, the whole mystical experience I find comes down to the unknown gaze of a designer at the design of reality. And that moment is so nature, like, I don't know how to tell you. It's so natural, like you'll laugh at who you thought you were in this life. You'll also cry too. It's at the same time, but as Lao Tzu said, you must let go of who you are now to become who you are meant to. Something like that. To be honest, I feel like this is the thing. The child is born. The child psychology. Let's say we are trying to wonder about the future generations. The child is born. The child adopts a reality, a way where a subjective explanation to itself of how sensory data is being its world. Now, it chooses to, based on a certain range of contemplation, then act. That means even though we're data processing creatures, but we're not endlessly processing one kind of data. So that means it's like, regardless of who you have been, life is going forward, and it's like new actions define new characters, new characteristics. It's about uh, concentration and consideration and sensitivity, that it's like, okay, you have a unique DNA. Now that there's a human ability of transferring external chaos internally. Do you see? Because here's the thing, war begins because of inner chaos being externalized. Okay? But there are ways where the outer chaos can be internalized, in the sense that it's like, if the mind is leading to the body's action, then in some sense the mind is in a position before the body's action. Do you know? As there's many actions, many ways that the person is a character in this video game simulation of a life, you know? It's not about throwing language at fast speeds at one another. It's in some sense about the true care. It's like what I feel there were certain things that were inner technologies, or you could say certain ways human beings were looking at the world where there was more ability. Strangely, there was a sort of more inner freedom. As you see, kind of, Carl Jung spoke about this. I don't remember in what it was, but he had this idea of saying that in some sense, this shift from traditional values into modern values, it was as if it was a way of avoiding the ancient problem by trying to think that a different action is a different destiny. Do you know? So it's one of those things where tradition, before changing, fights till its last breath. What that means is this is the will of this discipline becomes mechanically powerful at some point. That means through the momentum of repetition, there does come power. I mean, like pretty much that dude who said, you know, you require 10,000 hours to master something. Similarly, it's like you master your moment by as Shirin Sargadot would say, studying the self. That's what it really means. It means study reality completely. That means it's not an escape from objective reality. It's not that the party's happening in another dimension and we have to get out of here. You know, like I find more it's about in accordance to how much you hear and can observe the world. Eventually, after some point of honestly looking at what's going on, you'll notice certain uh, inner efforts of expression. You see, the issue is it's not that people I find are not creative. I think the issue is that the way they have conceptualized creativity is a blockade. Do you know? And what I mean by that is that you are giving yourself value, not realizing creativity is about value from the unknown coming to the known. Do you see? So it's like it's not that just you have to do something all the time to become aware of a sort of momentum and movement of thought. So that's what I mean when I say this. I'm entertaining my notion of the linguistic simulation. I'm kind of the title of this talk is being considered only in a subjective realm. You know, the whole sensitivity to language is about what image is connected to what language. You know, it's like this comedian was saying, like these poor souls who have to go apologize because they said use language in a certain way. You know, and it's kind of strange because we have to respect external law. Let me tell you, it's like, trust me, it's like those people who are against society. I'll tell you, let's say you are against society and you become successful, and now you're left in a sort of chaotic freedom, you know, a sort of free anarchy. Okay, then what? You see, it's that the order, being able to see how much you are doing the harder task, like you constantly rescan your own intelligence and readapt. But once you kind of find your presence in the moment, then there is a strange no longer wanting something or wanting to give something. It becomes simply the moment, you know. And it's like that language of nature is not in time; it's instantaneous, you know. So Anyways, new cultural patterns erase past traditional values. So if ideas were seen as citizens, you know, many ideas are dying. They are dying because the human attention chooses where its attention goes to, and it has slowly. It's as if it was part of it. I think it's like um, the world is not really a bad place. It was actually the most updated leap of evolution. You know, believe it or not, a purpose to life is kind of like you're the modern update. You are the most updated evolutionary creature manifest. And it's kind of fascinating because we're natural creatures, you know, there is so much of the inner realm that is natural. That means I have been in construction sites, but behind my eyes I've been walking in like grasslands, you know? And it's just the notion of playfully entertaining. Sometimes it's kind of like imagine you're in space in a space station, and it's like you have a chess piece in your hand, and you just push this chess piece, you spin it, and you constantly see this endless sort of spinning, you know, as if like energy is behaving differently, you know. How necessary is it for a man to attempt his greatest opportunity? From one viewpoint, to be honest, it's not necessary, it's nature from the beginning until the end. But from another viewpoint, it's like, okay, why is the opportunity here? Why is the ego here? Why is the idea of self here? Why is the person entertaining a story to the world? These questions kind of, I feel, open your eyes from the inside. So, anyways, guys, to be honest, I was incredibly tired today, but hopefully I managed to get certain ideas out. Um, always be playful with language. It changes actions, resculpt what words mean, and words can also, in some sense, redirect it action. We saw truth in matter, then we saw truth in that which was beyond matter, and its most immediate thing that came from the unknown was language. To be honest, I can even say this as a playful hypothesis that the creature had no choice but to become thought. Yeah, I think I see a scene where this is clear to me. The creature had no choice but to evoke the subjective realm. It was pushed by nature. Because it was pushed, it means like, okay, we see an inanimate universe. It's like, okay, what forces of, you know, what universal laws are at work here, you know? At the same time, if it's animate, then in some sense we have to acknowledge the cosmos has a mind. Now, whatever you call it, however way you try to fathom it, even considering that, like, imagine the cells in your body, like suddenly the blood cells in your body suddenly became conscious and were like, okay, let's philosophize where we are, and they have no way of fathoming why you, for example, go to work. So it's one. So do you see what I mean? It's one of those things where there is literally the imagination is showing such a potential that after some point there can't be a future to it. That's the true presence of the unknown. You can't like. I find inspiration has a sort of momentary vocational quality. It's like emotion, like aligns with thought, like planets, and it becomes a sort of moment where the right value is felt, and you don't know, like we don't just move our hands with only purely our attention. Our attention has its hands also, you can say consciousness has its hands in the glove of our emotions. There's a very complex emotional intelligence, and honestly the emotional intelligence evolves differently for people. Do you see? It's kind of like saying that the child, before becoming a concept to itself, was a creature that was relating to cold and warmth, cold and warmth, cold and warmth, you know? A freedom beyond conception, a freedom before conception, a freedom that is always here. Every moment, time pulls us forth in, you know? That's why I'm saying it's like, if the person cared, they could complete incredible amounts of work if they cared. If you care for something, then it's like the spirit of that moment begins to acknowledge you. Anyways, guys, thanks for tuning in. Much blessings, and namaste.